They thought they were just draining a pond, a pesky little puddle on some old man's property. But they had no idea what they were really standing on, a secret that supplied water to the entire county. And when they finally took their victory lap, they had no idea they'd just given me the reason to turn the valve. It all started with her, the new HOA president. Let's call her Meredith Klein. She showed up on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand like it was a scepter, her smile brittle as a saltine cracker. She was fresh off an election platform of restoring community standards, which seemed to mean harassing anyone with a garden gnome or, in my case, the beautiful, spring-fed reservoir I'd built 3 decades ago, a memorial to my late wife, Eleanor. She didn't bother with a friendly greeting, just handed me a single sheet of paper. The heading was stark. Order for nuisance abatement. The words swam before my eyes, claiming the unregistered body of water at the back of my property posed a significant flood risk. I almost laughed. Body of water. She meant the lake. Eleanor's lake. I looked up from the flimsy page, keeping my voice level. Meredith, I said, this isn't just a pond. It's the Stonebrook Reservoir. I designed and built it myself, fully permitted, inspected annually. Its spillway is designed to handle a 1,000-year flood event. She just nodded, that same brittle smile on her face, like she was a middle manager humoring a child. The board appreciates your perspective, Mr. Thompson. However, a formal complaint was filed and an expert assessment confirms the risk. It has to go. I asked to see this expert assessment. She pulled out another sheet. No letterhead, no engineer's seal, no signature. Just a few vague sentences about soil saturation and overflow potential. I recognized the template. It was a cheap form downloaded from a landscaping website. I pointed this out. This isn't an engineering report, Meredith. It's a flyer. Who wrote this? Her smile tightened as she pulled the paper back. The assessment was conducted by a qualified third party. We are not at liberty to disclose vendor information due to privacy protocols. Just corporate gibberish, a word salad designed to shut down any real conversation. I tried a different approach, the neighborly one. Look, I was the senior water systems engineer for this county for 40 years. I can walk you through the schematics. This lake is safer than the HOA's retention pond down by the clubhouse. For a moment, her mask slipped. A flicker of pure annoyance crossed her face. She hated being told I knew something she didn't. That won't be necessary, she snapped. The board's decision is final. 14 days, Mr. Thompson, or we will be forced to take action and bill you for the expense. She turned and marched down my driveway, her sensible shoes clicking on the asphalt. I closed the door, the flimsy order still in my hand, and it felt like a joke. The lake was the last piece of Eleanor I had left. We designed it together after I retired, picking the spot where the dogwoods bloomed, the smooth river stones for the shore, the place for the little wooden bench where she'd sit and read. After she was gone, I spread her ashes there. The idea of some power-hungry newcomer paving it over for community green space made my stomach clench. I called my old friend Frank, who used to be the county planning director. He laughed when I told him the story. Tom, they can't do that. It's a pre-existing permitted structure. Your property deeds include watershed easements that predate that HOA by 20 years. They have zero jurisdiction over that lake. Zero. I felt a wave of relief. Frank was right. This was just a bluff, a pathetic power play. Just get the paperwork together, he said. Send a certified letter and they'll back down. They have no legal leg to stand on. I spent the next 2 days in my office, gathering every piece of paper I had, the original county permits, geological surveys, my own handwritten maintenance logs. I was going to bury Meredith Klein in a mountain of lawful, professionally executed paperwork. I took a long drive to the county records office, confident, even a little smug. I imagined the look on her face when my lawyer served her with a cease and desist. But as I turned onto my street, I heard it. A low throbbing hum that didn't belong. I pulled into my driveway and my heart stopped. A big unmarked panel truck was parked on the grass, 2 thick black hoses snaking across my lawn down toward the lake. There, standing by the shore, was Meredith. She had her clipboard, of course, and next to her, A smirking young man in a polo shirt was watching as the pumps chugged away. The water level was already down by at least 4 feet. The beautiful stone shoreline Eleanor had designed was now just a wide, ugly ring of dark, wet mud. A small handful of trout flopped helplessly in the rapidly shrinking shallows. Eleanor's bench sat high and dry, isolated on a barren patch of cracked earth, looking like a forgotten gravestone. Meredith saw me coming. She didn't look guilty. She looked triumphant. "You were non-compliant, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We had to take action." My paperwork felt heavy and useless in my hand. All my proof, all my facts, all my reason. It meant nothing to her. She hadn't waited the 14 days. The moment I was gone, she'd moved in. I just stared at the dying water, the exposed mud, the ruined memorial. I stared at the gushing hose pouring 30 years of my life into a ditch. Something inside me had gone cold and hard as granite. I let the silence hang, filled only by the chugging of the pump. Then I looked past her at the muddy ground where my wife's lake used to be, and I spoke, my voice low and steady. I said, "I told them not to wake the water. The local news van showed up the next day." Meredith stood there looking concerned and professional, a little furrow in her brow. She explained that the HOA had acted on an urgent expert recommendation to mitigate a long-standing flood risk. She painted me as an uncooperative, sentimental old man, clinging to a dangerous pet project. The performance was flawless. She was the hero. I was the problem. I called the county again, getting passed from one clueless clerk to another. My old friend Frank called me back, sounding frustrated. "They're stonewalling, Tom. Politically, it's easier to just stay quiet and let you take the hit." I was on my own. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a slow, cold, burning anger. An engineer's anger. I stopped looking at the muddy hole as a wound and started looking at it as a crime scene. That afternoon, my neighbor Sarah, a retired history teacher, sharp as a tack, came over with sandwiches. "That woman is a menace," she said, shaking her head at the devastation. "What are you going to do?" I laid out the phony expert assessment on the table. "I'm going to start with this," I told her. This is where the lie began. For the next few hours, my kitchen became a command center. Sarah was a wizard at navigating public records. I handled the technical side. The landscaping company on the unsigned report was called Green Acres Solutions. Its corporate registration papers had a name on them. Derek Klein. Sarah let out a low whistle. "Klein," she said. "Same as Meredith." A quick search on her tablet revealed a photo on Meredith's Facebook page, her arm around the smirking young man I'd seen by the pumps. The caption read, "So proud of my brilliant nephew Derek for launching his new business. The future of community landscaping. It was dirty, but it wasn't enough. Nepotism isn't a crime. We needed the money trail." Sarah made a phone call to another longtime resident, a woman on the HOA's finance committee who had been complaining for weeks that Meredith was shutting her out. An hour later, a plain manila envelope was in my mailbox, containing photocopies of the HOA's bank statements and a document titled Special Project Expenditure, Lakeside Restoration Initiative. My hands shook as I read it. The contract between the HOA and Green Acres Solutions had a vague scope of work. The price tag was $120,000, and right at the bottom, a detail that made the breath catch in my throat. Payment in full upon signing. Meredith had paid her nephew the entire sum up front before a single shovel had hit the ground. On the final page, there was a single signature line for board approval, and only one signature was on it, Meredith Klein. This wasn't about flood risk. It was a $120,000 heist disguised as they'd stolen my water, drained it into a gutter, and now they were planning on cashing a check. A quiet, grim smile touched my lips as I looked down at the valve that held the entire system in balance. I muttered it to the empty air, to the ghosts of the trout, and the memory of my wife. Guess they forgot where this water really comes from. That red valve wheel wasn't just hardware. It was a promise I made to the county almost 20 years ago. In the wake of a bad drought, the county's primary system was overworked and had no reliable backup. So I drew up a plan. A secondary gravity-fed intake from my spring-fed lake. It would be completely off-grid, running on nothing but elevation and pressure. In the event of a primary pump failure, a fire, or a contamination event, they could open one valve and keep water flowing to the hospital, the fire stations, and 3 downstream residential districts. I funded the construction myself on one condition: it had to be kept off the public maps. We live in a world where one person with a grudge can cause a lot of damage, and the fewer people who knew, the safer it would be. Frank and the old county commissioners agreed. It was just the right thing to do, a silent safeguard. And for 20 years, everybody drank my silence. Now with the lake drained, that entire emergency system was nothing more than a series of empty pipes. The safeguard was gone. The promise was broken, and to make matters worse, the local news was talking about an unusually dry spring. The system was already strained, running with no safety net. I called the new county water commissioner, a young man named Peterson, barely out of college. I explained who I was and what Meredith had done. The emergency bypass originating from Stonebrook Reservoir is now offline, I told him. The reservoir has been drained by a third party. I'm advising you that your emergency water supply is compromised. There was a long pause. Stonebrook Reservoir? He said like he'd never heard the name. Sir, I'm looking at the county maps and all I see at your address is a private land parcel. There's no municipal reservoir there. I explained the quiet agreement, the off-the-books nature of the project. His tone went from confused to dismissive. Look, Mr. Thompson, he said, his voice slick with bureaucratic detachment, it sounds like you're having a property dispute with your HOA. That's a civil matter. I'd advise you to contact your attorney. The line went dead. So that was it. The system had forgotten itself. The new generation of managers only knew what was on their computer screens. My work, Frank's handshake, the promise made to protect thousands of people. It was all just ancient history, a ghost in the machine. I hung up the phone and realized I couldn't report the problem. I had to become the problem. I spent my entire career managing pressures you couldn't see. Water pressure, political pressure, the pressure of time in an emergency. They thought I'd fold, but I've done things with pressure they couldn't dream of. I made a phone call. The man who answered on the second ring had a voice like gravel in a coffee can. Mac, I said, I need a hand with some plumbing. Mac was a retired fire captain, a man I'd worked with on a dozen emergency calls. He understood infrastructure and pressure in a way few people do. He showed up after dark with his heavy canvas tool bag. Well, I'll be, he said, peering down at the big red valve. That's the beast, huh? Never actually seen it, Mac grinned. They poked the wrong damn bear, Tom. We worked through the night. It wasn't about destruction, it was about redirection. We didn't shut off the main water supply. That would have been reckless. Instead, we isolated the secondary loop that fed the pressure assist pumps for 3 of the oldest developments in the county. It was a subtle change, not a catastrophic one. Like tightening a string on a guitar just a little too much. It wouldn't break right away, but it would throw everything out of tune. By 4 a.m., we were done. Call me when the music starts, Max said and drove off. The music started about 36 hours later. The first calls came in on Tuesday afternoon, low pressure. Then came Wednesday morning, when thousands of people were trying to shower and water their lawns. The already strained system, now deprived of its quiet pressure assist, began to falter. The trickle of calls became a flood. By Wednesday evening, the water pressure in 3 entire towns had dropped by 30%. Faucets sputtered. Toilets wouldn't refill properly. Then came the official alert, a county-wide boil water advisory. Suddenly, it wasn't just my problem anymore. It was everybody's problem. My phone rang just after the 10:00 news. It was Commissioner Peterson. His voice wasn't so slick and dismissive this time. Mr. Thompson, he started, we have a massive pressure drop in the eastern quadrant, and my engineers can't find a leak. Your name came up. The backup system you mentioned? I let the silence hang for a beat. I told you it was a public safety risk, I said calmly. You told me it was a civil matter. I could hear him breathing on the other end. What do you know about this, Blake? I didn't answer directly. Instead, I said, check your email. While he was on the phone, I'd sent him a high-resolution scan of my original engineering map of the backup system. On that map, I had drawn a thick red line showing the exact boundaries of the protected watershed area. The line cut directly across the back of my property, encircling the lake, and it showed with perfect legal clarity exactly where Meredith Klein had directed her nephew to trespass with heavy machinery. "This wasn't just about my lake, Commissioner," I said into the phone. "It was about your water, and you let them touch it. The fallout at the HOA was immediate." People who hadn't cared about my pond were now furious about their sputtering taps. At an emergency HOA board meeting that night, Meredith tried to deflect, calling the water issue an unfortunate coincidence. But the board members, facing a room full of angry homeowners, weren't buying it. I had one last card to play. The agreement I'd made with the county all those years ago wasn't a donation. It was a lease. A 20-year lease for the use of my private water and infrastructure for the grand sum of $1 a year. It was set to expire next Tuesday. Unless it was renewed with my signature, the county would officially lose all legal right of access to its own emergency water supply. They wouldn't just be dealing with low pressure, they would be trespassing. The community meeting was moved to the high school auditorium to handle the crowd. Every seat was filled. The local news vans were parked outside. People came carrying empty water jugs and holding signs that read, "We need water, not green space." I waited in the hallway with Sarah and a half-dozen of my old colleagues from the county engineering department, a quiet army of gray-haired competents. When the doors opened, we walked in together. The HOA board sat on the stage, looking like they were facing a firing squad. Meredith was in the center, trying to project calm authority, but her knuckles were white. She opened the meeting by once again blaming the county for the water crisis. Finally, a woman in the third row stood up. "I want to hear from Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice clear and strong. "He's the one you accused of being a risk. I want to hear his side." Meredith had no choice. She reluctantly gestured to the podium. I walked up and adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the faces in the crowd. "My neighbors. My name is Tom Thompson," I began. "For 40 years, I was your county's senior water engineer. I'm the man who designed the system you're all relying on. And I'm the man whose private property was illegally entered and vandalized by your HOA president." I paused, letting that sink in. "She told you she drained my lake to protect you from a flood. That was a lie." I looked directly at Meredith. "The real reason is a bit more expensive." Sarah stood up and handed me a tablet. I placed it on the podium and tapped the screen. A video started playing on the large projector screen behind the board. It was a shaky cell phone video pulled from a public social media account. It showed Derek Klein at a bar with some friends, bragging, slurring his words. "Check it out," he was saying. "Signed and paid in full. On 20 grand. Best part is I get paid twice. Once to drain the old man's swamp and again to fill it back in with pretty flowers. Easiest money I ever made." The video was time-stamped 2 days before the pumps even showed up at my house. The crowd erupted. I turned off the video. "Let me be very clear," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. 1. The HOA has no legal jurisdiction over my lake or the watershed it sits in. None. 2. Draining that lake didn't just destroy a wildlife habitat. It crippled the emergency water supply for this entire region, a fact the county was repeatedly warned about. And 3, that so-called expert. I let the weight of that word hang in the silent room. Then I delivered the final blow. As of today, the county's 20-year lease agreement for emergency water access through my property is set to expire. I will not be renewing it. It was like a bomb went off. Commissioner Peterson, who was sitting in the back, went pale. The auditorium exploded into pure chaos. The shouts of "Resign!" and "Resign now!" drowned out Meredith's voice as she tried to speak. The other board members, one by one, took out pre-written resignation letters. The rats were leaving the sinking ship. Meredith was left standing alone, completely isolated. She looked wildly from the empty chairs beside her to the furious faces in front of her, and for the first time she looked genuinely afraid. She turned and fled, running off the side of the stage and out a back exit. She ran right into 2 sheriff's deputies who had been waiting quietly in the hall. "Meredith Klein," one of them said calmly, "you're being detained for questioning regarding environmental tampering and endangerment of public utilities." The door swung shut behind them, leaving the auditorium in stunned, triumphant silence. The next morning, 2 black sedans with county government plates were parked in front of my house. Commissioner Peterson got out of one, looking like he hadn't slept. They didn't come to threaten. They came to negotiate. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Sarah and I had uncovered the fraud. "What are your terms, Mr. Thompson?" the county's chief counsel asked. I laid out two non-negotiable conditions. First, the lake was to be fully restored to its original permitted specifications, paid for entirely by the county. Second, the HOA's charter was to be dissolved. "That's highly unusual," she said. "So is turning off a county's water supply," I replied. Peterson just nodded slowly. "We'll make it happen." A few weeks later, a proper environmental engineering firm arrived with earth movers, hydrologists, and biologists. They carefully regraded the shoreline and began the slow process of refilling the lake from its natural spring source. The work was precise, professional, and respectful. It was healing. The fallout settled slowly over the next few months. Meredith's house went up for sale with a deep discount. She vanished from the neighborhood, becoming a cautionary tale parents would tell their kids about what happens when you mistake power for intelligence. Her nephew, Derek, pleaded guilty to fraud and conspiracy charges. The name Klein became synonymous with a very specific, very public kind of failure. The old HOA charter was dissolved and replaced by a volunteer community board. Their meetings were held in the open, budgets posted online, and the rule book rewritten from scratch. The clipboard bullies were gone, replaced by neighbors talking to neighbors. One Saturday morning, Commissioner Peterson showed up at my door, alone. He just wanted to walk the property. I took him out back to the hidden well cover that housed the big red valve. He looked down at it for a long time. "We almost lost everything because we forgot this was here," he said, his voice quiet. "Because I forgot." A few weeks later, they installed a simple bronze plaque on the side of the small, discreet valve house. It read, "In honor of Thomas Thompson, who gave quietly and fought when it mattered." It was a permanent reminder to the next generation of engineers and commissioners to never let institutional memory fail again. By late fall, the lake was full again. The engineering firm had managed to save the flat river stones Eleanor had picked out, rebuilding the shoreline exactly as it had been. They'd brought back her bench, too. I'd hired a local craftsman to etch her name into the backrest. Eleanor Thompson, 1954-2018. The ducks had come back. A great blue heron had started visiting again, standing like a statue in the shallows. Everything was as it should be. I took a cup of coffee out to the bench and sat down. The cool wood was familiar beneath my hands. The air was crisp, and the only sound was the gentle lapping of the water against the stones. The rage and the stress of the past few months felt a million miles away. It had all been so loud, so chaotic. But now there was just peace. The lake's quiet again, just how she liked it. But now it knows how to roar. What's your take? Was what I did an act of justified retribution, or did it go too far? Let me know in the comments below.